I hope you're excited because we've finally arrived at the skill that's going to put everything we've learned so far to good use, taking your overall learning skills to the next level. That's right, we're ready to start speed reading. Now, with that said, we need to ensure that as we transition into speed readers, we don't forget our fundamentals. Though a big part of the speed reading learning curve will mean that you don't have high comprehension in the short term, we do want to make sure that you're keeping comprehension and retention at high levels over the long run. This is a bit difficult though, because it's surprisingly easy to fool yourself into thinking that you remember everything. When you go back through the text later on to test yourself, or when you take a quiz, you'll often tell yourself, yeah, I remember this stuff. But oftentimes, the brain is tricking us. It's mistaking familiarity with actual retention, because when you see a piece of information, it somewhat jogs your memory. This is called confirmation bias, and it's something we want to avoid if we're going to accurately measure our comprehension and retention. So here's an exercise that we recommend for periodically testing yourself and your comprehension. After pre-reading and speed reading a section of text, take a moment to jot down everything you remember on paper or a text document, and then compare your notes side by side with the text that you read. This is a powerful exercise, not only because it will keep you honest and shut down your confirmation bias, but also because you can learn a lot from the details you neglected or remembered incorrectly. By doing this, you can determine if, for example, you need to pay a little more attention to names or dates or anything else. Anytime you miss a pertinent detail or concept, you should ask yourself why it happened. Is it in the very beginning or the end of the text where you might have been eager to start or finish and you lost focus? Do you have a bias towards certain types of information? Do you think that there were too many details in the text? With that said, you need to use your judgment here. Sometimes a bias towards a specific type of information is a good thing. If you're reading a technical manual and you're biased towards the technical specifications over the less useful descriptive information, that's fine, and in fact it's preferable. Essentially, we don't expect you to regurgitate the text 100% word for word. We do, however, expect that with time, you'll be able to identify and recall every detail, concept, and idea that you deem pertinent. Not all details are pertinent though, and you should be able to differentiate which information is throwaway and which information should be remembered. What if you added information that wasn't there to begin with? Well, first and foremost, ask yourself why. Perhaps you're trying to analyze the text while reading instead of during the pauses at the end of each paragraph or section instead. There's no specific homework for this exercise or for some of the other speed reading skills we'll be teaching you. Instead, you should work this exercise and the others we'll share into your normal training throughout the course of the coming weeks. You don't need to quiz yourself every time you read, but you should try to do this exercise as often as possible. It'll greatly improve your retention, not just of the text you're practicing on, but also of everything you read as you become more and more aware of your weak spots over time, and you use that knowledge to overcome them. So, we finally arrived at the sexiest part of the course, speed reading. Let's first start by understanding how most people, like me before I took Anna's course, and probably like yourself as well, are reading. When most people read, they actually hear the words in their mental voice. Now this is a process called subvocalization, and they go along the text and hear the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. This is because when we're taught to read, we have to sound it out. We don't know how words look visually, and so we sound them out. F, O, X, fox. Now this is a very hard habit to break because it is how we learned, and it's how we've read for the last 10 or 20 years. And so we associate the words we see not with the meaning or the content directly, but with the sounds they make in our mind. and then we translate those sounds into meaning or content. Like we've learned already, this is hugely inefficient. By sub-vocalizing this way, you're effectively taking high-quality visual information and symbols in the form of written words, and you're degrading the quality or bandwidth. If you think about it, it's sort of like trying to describe a picture to your friend over the phone rather than just showing them the picture so they can see it for themselves. Now, the maximum speed that any sub-vocalizing reader can attain is about 250 words a minute. Speed reading, however, starts at about 450 words per minute, roughly double that. And since I know you're wondering, nearly all of you taking this class can at least break 700 words per minute. Some of you will even reach 800 or 1200 words per minute before you need more intensive one-on-one coaching. This may sound incredible at first. You may doubt yourself or doubt that your brain can do all of this. Now, if that's the case, let me ask you this. Have you ever had a great idea pop into your head and instantaneously you understand the idea in its entirety before your mind even has the opportunity to try and form words around it? I mean, think about the fact that the symbol for a new idea is a light bulb. Most likely because a new idea hits you at the speed of light and it's instantly formed in your head in a fraction of the time it would take to describe it verbally. Or how about this? Have you ever stepped into the road and noticed that a car or motorcycle or bicycle is approaching you and you reacted with lightning speed? You see, in that type of scenario, your brain was not only able to assess the speed and trajectory of the incoming threat, but also to weigh all of your options and to make a decision and then to communicate to your body the best course of action. All of this happens without any form of sub-vocalization of your thought process. Every single day, your brain does all of this in fractions of a second. Every time you're about to drop something on your toe, and every time you see a familiar face in a crowd, your brain can perform these incredibly complex functions in literally fractions of a second. In fact, neuroscientists have recently discovered that even though it takes a bit longer to process, your brain requires only 13 milliseconds to recognize an image. That's 0.013 seconds. And you're worried about understanding a bunch of visual symbols on a page a little faster? Nonsense. Beyond all this, when you lean on subvocalization during reading, you'll be much more easily distracted and you'll have a lower comprehension and retention. This is because there are three things happening at once, like we said earlier on in the course. By subvocalizing, you're trying to perform the encoding, the storage, and the retrieval processes all at once, which massively strains your working memory. In speed reading, however, we learn to read much quicker than the so-called sound barrier of subvocalization. This necessitates that we use a more efficient process for absorbing the visual information. We suppress that inner voice, and instead we start to recognize words for what they are: visual symbols. We also break apart the three processes of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. You may remember that we explained this with the metaphor of washing one shirt at a time. Here's a quick overview of how we're going to learn to read differently. First, we're going to absorb the information and encode it using rapid, efficient versions of something called saccades. From there, we'll train our minds to quickly and automatically store information into our short-term memory, and to prime it for long-term memory using emotionally significant markers or reference points. Now, we've covered that already. Finally, we take periodic pauses at the end of pages or chapters, like we mentioned before, and we perform retrieval. Retrieval, or playing back the markers and reviewing them, convinces the hippocampi to move the most detailed information possible into the long-term memory and to maintain it while it's there. By breaking this process apart into three separate steps, our entire learning and reading process becomes both more efficient and more effective. As you can imagine, there are a number of steps we need to follow in order to perform this somewhat delicate untangling of the three. But don't worry, we're going to deal with that in the next lectures. The first thing we do when we actually sit down to speed reading is imagine 2 or 3 separate columns on the page, and we train our eyes to jump between those columns. As it turns out, our eyes are actually incapable of making smooth, gradual movements unless they're tracking a moving object. So if we're moving our visual focus from one thing to another, for example, from one word on a page to the one next to it, our eyes have to make very sharp, precise jumps. And these jumps are called saccades. When you dart your eyes across the room because you see something in your peripheral vision, you're able to move quickly and refocus very quickly. That's a saccade. And the points that your eyes end up on, where they focus and allow the brain to figure out what it's seeing, those are called fixations. In general, average readers do 10 to 20 small saccades per line of text. This means that they're actually making one saccade and one fixation for every word. As you can imagine, this is hugely inefficient because all the time your eyes spend moving is time that they're not sending information to the brain, at least not information that it can use. If you don't believe me, put your hands out in front of you, about 2 hands width apart. Focus on one hand, and then jump over to the other. Do this again and again, and try to notice what's happening while your eyes are in motion. If you do it enough times, you'll realize that your brain is essentially stitching the images together from when you're fixated on either hand to provide an uninterrupted image. But it's not really focusing on taking in any information while your eyes are in motion. This effect is called saccadic masking, or is often called saccadic blindness. To avoid the inefficiencies of becoming effectively blind during saccadic masking, speed readers minimize the number of fixations per line to between 2 and 3 in a normal book, or 4 to 5 in a full-width web page. This means making only 1 or 2 saccades per line on an average paperback book, or 3 to 4 on a full-width web page. The goal is to learn to do this as quickly and effectively as possible, no matter what format our reading material comes in. Of course, we should try to format the text into an appropriate width for 2 to 3 fixations if we have an option. We'll cover e-readers, browser extensions, and stuff like that later, but when formatting the text isn't possible, we try to think in advance during our pre-reading how many saccades will be necessary to efficiently cover the page. And in time, we'll learn how to expand the width of our fixations in order to minimize the number of saccades we need to make. For example, in a small printed newspaper column or on an electronic device such as a cell phone, one fixation is usually enough, meaning that you can focus on the middle of the screen and simply scroll downwards with your eyes. This one trick of jumping in saccades and creating larger fixations is pretty much the gist of what most speed reading classes teach in their 2-hour seminars. It summarizes everything that Tim Ferriss preaches in the PX Method article. And it's the basis for all speed reading. But what's missing in Tim's method is not only the memory skills to ensure high retention, but also the process of optimizing the saccades to reach much higher speeds than even he can claim. So let's jump in and see how we can get past that 450 words per minute with 20% comprehension roadblock. As we go along, make sure to check the PDF syllabus, as the number of games and exercises you're going to need to practice and play every day is going to start picking up. And we'll be offering you a lot of games that will help you master this crucial skill. One of the best ways to exceed the 450 word per minute limit of those other speed reading programs is to improve your focal eye span. As it turns out, we can train the eye to have a wider fixation, even if only by a little bit, and to catch more words on the periphery of our fixations. The main way of doing this is to use something called Schultz tables. Schultz tables show you a table of numbers, and they ask you to focus on the center number while trying to determine what the numbers next to it are. Over time, you practice by going out further and further into the periphery, and eventually, you should see a dramatic improvement in your peripheral vision. That's why these exercises As we mentioned before, it's important to learn how to speed read in any condition: when you're handed paper documents, when you open your emails, and when you pick up a classic paper book. This is one of the reasons we don't recommend using automation software such as Spritz or Accelerated beyond the initial comprehension training period. These tools do not train you to make the most efficient eye movements, and they'll leave you high and dry when real-world conditions come in. With that said, there's nothing wrong with using the available tools out there to format reading materials into the most ideal speed reading layout whenever possible. This means removing images, making the font a little larger, condensing the column into a 2 to 3 saccade width, switching to black and white, and clearing up formatting to be consistent. Fortunately, there are tons of tools out there for your iPad, your Galaxy S, your web browser, and so much more. This lecture will walk you through some of them. First, let's start out with my favorites: the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. I personally love to use Safari's reading mode, and I even have a keyboard shortcut set up for it on my browser. Furthermore, if you're using an iPad or an iPhone, there's this handy button on the top left that will allow you to switch right into reading mode. Now, how about on your Windows or Linux PC, or if you don't use Safari on your Mac? Well, if you're browsing using the Chrome or Firefox browsers, you should check out the Readability extension, either from the Google Chrome Extension Store or the Firefox Extension Market. And for all of you Android lovers, yes, Readability is also available as an Android app, which we definitely recommend checking out. By the way, on the topic of mobile, there are some other great apps out there such as Instapaper or Pocket, which allow you to send articles you encounter from all over the web and to format them into a reading list, which is automatically presented to you in an easy-to-read format that will be very easy on your eyes. If you come across a lot of articles that you want to save for later, these tools can be absolutely invaluable, and you can add to them using a bookmarklet, email, or even web automation services like IFTTT. How about Kindle or other e-readers? Well, that's part of the beauty of these devices. They're actually already formatted for reading enjoyment, and they allow you to set the font size to something that will make for 2 or 3 fixations. Although the Kindle's page turning will be a bit obnoxious if you're speed reading, that will be a great opportunity to review your markers. On the iBooks app for iPhone or iPad, we do recommend enabling continuous scroll, as that can really speed things up a bit. And of course, you can manipulate the font sizes here as well. Because of these advantages on the Kindle, Nook, iBooks app, and other platforms, you should always try to get your reading materials in .mobi or .epub native formats rather than PDF, because unfortunately, there's no way to reformat the text of a PDF to suit speed reading. But hey, what about paper? Well, you may soon find that 8.5 by 11 pages are a lot less convenient than text that you're able to reformat to your liking and scroll through quickly. Ironically, screens are a bit faster, though they're more tiring for the eye to read on. So experiment with it and see how your eyes feel about the trade-off. When you have a choice between a larger hardcover version of a book and a handy 6x9 paperback though, always go with the paperback. I mean, it's cheaper, it's more environmentally friendly, and it's a lot easier to speed read on something this big than on something this big. Personally, I try to read 100% digital, not just because it's faster and cheaper, but because if you read 2 to 3 books on a week-long vacation, that's a pretty good amount of weight added to your bags. In any case, your homework is to check the PDF syllabus and experiment with some of the apps, extensions, and services we've recommended. Pick some good ones, sign up, and get acquainted with them, because in the coming lectures, you're going to be doing a lot of reading and a lot of practicing, so you'll really want to be set up and ready for success. Before we wrap up with saccades, I just want to take 1 minute to talk about a critical mistake that a lot of people make. Sometimes you may notice that you start your saccades on the first word and end them on the last word of a line. If you're doing this, you're wasting precious eye span on either side on white space. As my father always told me, you have to make sure you're reading the black stuff, not the white stuff. Don't start your saccades at the beginning or end at the very end of a line. Start them 1 or 2 words in and end them 1 or 2 words in. So if you imagine your 3 columns, you're actually starting in the middle of each of the 3 columns. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This way, you have to make fewer saccades, 3 instead of 4 in this case, and you'll notice that you're getting the information in much quicker. Of course, for seamless stitching together of the images, it's a good idea to include some overlap between your saccades, and that'll be much easier if you've expanded your fixation width using the Schultz table exercise. I also want to share a neat little side benefit that I've noticed from training myself to properly use larger fixations and limiting saccades, and that's finding stuff. I first noticed that I could repurpose this skill when I went on a trip with my parents to Hong Kong. Every time we would get off the subway, we had to figure out which direction to go and where the exit was for the street we were trying to get to. While my parents would look back and forth, making small saccades and spending a lot of time in saccadic blindness, I would make 2 saccades, breaking the 180-degree view of the station into 3 fixations. Time after time, I would be the first one to find the appropriate station. Now I realized this skill of minimizing saccades was applicable to lots of situations in which I need to rapidly find something in a visual horizon. I use it to quickly find the product I'm looking for on the supermarket shelf. I use it to find my friends in the crowd at the beach. It's amazing to me how much faster I can sort out visual information when I limit the amount of saccadic blindness I'm exposed to. Instead of making lots of small movements, I fixate just a little bit longer and I make large saccades. Try it out, and I think you'll also find that it's a really nice and unexpected side benefit of your speed reading training. As always, make sure to check the PDF syllabus, as we've introduced a lot of different games and activities for you to practice this week, and you don't want to miss out on any of them.
So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how saccades are used. In this case, we have a book which was given to us in PDF format, so we're not able to format it to our liking. And this is actually the Key to Study book, Chapter 5. So what I want to show you guys is where my eye would rest if I were doing the proper saccades. Now, in the beginning stages, you might need 3 fixations for a line of this width. And if you haven't done your Schultz tables, you will be at 3 fixations. So you might look at perfect, consists, and people. Then you might look at degree, need, and either in or reading. So on and so forth. You get the idea. Daily, described, book. Okay? Now over time, you're going to improve, and I know you're going to do your Schultz table exercises. You're not going to neglect to do them like I did. So then you'll be making 2 columns. You'll divide the page right around here. And so then you can look at audience, students, who, satisfaction. You see how much faster that's going to be to only have to make 1 saccade in the middle of the line and only have 2 fixations per line? So if we jump down here, you'll just focus on key to study, presented, and you'll have overlap in the middle. And you know, Dr. Lev and his students who take the personal coaching route or who really invest in the Schultz tables, they find that on something smaller, maybe if it's like this, they can actually just look down the middle and only make vertical saccades.